Hi, I'm Meg.
And I'm Dory.
My sister Dor,
Mhm.
and we use our powers for good. Today we're gonna be talking about
Our family of origin.
again. Here we go. But in particular the muck.
No,
Go for it then.
the muck is the next time.
Okay.
So we thought it would make sense that we talk about how we grew up in the environment that we grew up in because it framed who we are, and also because we have really two very different experiences.
Sure.
Um,
I feel like we talked about that though. We've talked about that in the last bunch of episodes.
have we?
Yeah.
So this is nice because we're pausing.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe.
So I think it's all the muck, but it's also the origin story of learning about the muck.
I think we talked about how we grew up, but then not how it framed how we are, right?
Sure.
We talked about how we were different and that dad wasn't around by the time you were older and that I was, and just how that looked different, but maybe not kind of what we took out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if we go back and talk about our house, if you walked in there at
Blech.
different points in time. So when I was young, you would have been like not born yet,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe one. um, it was kind of this like it was like a theater production, and this was the front of the house, and this was the back of the house, right? So whatever went on in the front of the house, we knew that people were there. We kind of like were on our best behavior and behaving a certain way, and then there might be mean looks or pushing or shoving or unkindness in the back, but people didn't see that.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I think about that, because I've not thought about it in that way, it was very intentional.
And I would say my origin story of mom. I think of the first house on Cambridge Court.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first home,
Yep.
and then Center Place,
Mm-hmm.
and that was certainly the story at Center Place.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, truly, it was like the main level everyone had access to. Our mom did childcare for up to like 17, 15
Like
kids.
200 kids at a time.
Yeah, and then upstairs was off limits,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was the living room
Yeah,
that was off limits.
yeah,
So those were the behind the scenes
yeah, for sure,
spaces.
for sure. And like when I think back, like even just, and there's the cat. Mitz is coming in for the kill. Um, that we needed to dress a certain way, and if we had company, we were expected to like do our hair and like dress up. And so even just being aware of like going to church and presenting ourselves, that sounds so insane now.
And she tried that with Mike and I, and it
Mm-hmm.
didn't go well.
Well, but by the time you guys were older,
Right,
dad was long gone.
right.
So anything that she was going to keep up, she was going to have to keep up herself.
Yeah.
Yeah, versus our dad was super angry and drunk, and um, that's an easy way to get people to do stuff that you want is by being a dick. Um, yeah, and I see how that shapes me now. I wouldn't say that I. It's interesting because I talk about this with my kids. I don't care about what people think in a, oh gosh, I need to dress a certain way so that they like me. It's more that if someone's important to me, that they would know that,
Mm-hmm.
right? So people that I care about are important to me, but I'm not concerned about someone that I don't know liking my hair or my clothes. I mean, clearly I'm sitting here in a hat and I'm all comfortable because that's comfortable. Um, yeah, but I am also aware of how that is contrary to culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
So how did that shape you?
Well, certainly dad being the way that he was, angry and mean, I could tolerate angry and mean, right? So on the one hand, I have skills that look like, things that are complicated and hard I can do. It also had me allow people in my life and put up with people. I didn't see it that way, that behave that way too, right? What was I just gonna say? Shoot, I lost it.
I remember, and I mean, I don't have memory of the abuse.
Yeah,
I have stories. I remember just being born into this folklore of stories
sure.
and it being talked about in a very joking way. You
Mm-hmm.
know, at Thanksgiving, at
Yeah,
Christmas, we'd all get together and there'd be these horror stories of remember that piece of wood
yeah,
with the nail that Brian, that dad.
right. Like he would a paddle he would spank us with.
Right.
Right.
But I do. And maybe because our house was big,
Yeah.
that old Victorian home, that was how many square feet? But I
Yeah.
remember shouting, that was how we were heard.
Yeah.
And that's how I would get my needs met when
Literally.
everyone would get together and I'd be like, run,
Yeah.
sit there slamming the door to be heard
Right.
to get mom's attention.
Right.
And then it wasn't until I met Chad, my husband, that I was like, oh, this isn't normal.
Mhm.
Because
Right.
he physically would shut down and just
Mm-hmm.
couldn't communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And for all the relationships I had prior to that, that's,
Interesting.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was always through this shouting, this raising my voice. Like, that's when I felt passionate.
Right.
And it wasn't
Right.
necessarily like I was fighting, it was just that's how I communicated.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, that's the loud Mexican part of us. And it was like, actually, that's not kind and loving. Like, it's,
Well, and even we've talked about this before, but like I'm tying this in with that you went through a period of time where you would get hurt and you would do things like to get like you didn't do it on purpose, right? But you would do things to get attention and to get
yeah, yeah. I didn't intentionally throw myself down the stairs,
no,
but
but
I would fall down the stairs. My coccyx would end up in my left butt cheek, and then I'd be paralyzed for 3 weeks.
right.
Tons of shit.
Yeah, no, I mean, but like looking back, it's like, oh right, you were just trying to get your needs met and
Yeah, right,
didn't know how to say that.
right. I needed big, loud actions to be heard,
Yeah.
which I still am learning.
Yeah, and I've put myself in a marriage where, he wasn't physically abusive, but ignored me. And the emotional piece was certainly there. So, like, just to look back, it's like, gosh, I wouldn't have. I put that together then, but I think for a lot of people, and I'm included in this, I was in the marriage and I was in there, right? And to realize that I essentially attracted someone that allowed me to continue what I grew up with, right?
Yeah,
And even being aware now, and I'm in a really healthy relationship with a very healthy, stable human, like healthy mind. Um, I still hear the old. I was just telling Meg this before. I still can hear the old tapes play. Like I'm on the hamster wheel when certain things happen. There's no abuse here.
yeah,
There's no one yelling at me. Oh, but I feel some of those same things, right? So we were talking about, so I'm gonna better define like the muck. There are things that happen when we're kids and we don't have words for them, right? And I think what happens is that we get to a certain point in our life and we're like, oh, wait a minute, this is anxiety or this is a panic attack and I was I'm in that phase where I'm kind of connecting dots and different things. And even though I've been doing my work since I was in my 20s, um, I didn't grow up at a time where I mean I'm sure there was anxiety, but we weren't talking about it like, oh, Dory's anxious,
right.
you know. But also I think from the time my feet landed on this earth or my body kind of was here, I was I wouldn't have called it anxiety and I wouldn't say I have anxiety now, but I certainly know that my nervous system or a part of me is escalated and I respond to it, which is different than, oh, I have anxiety. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
It just was part of the way that I am that I figured out how to operate. And then as I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, I wouldn't call it that because I'm able to observe that something's changing. And then I know, like, oh, I was uncomfortable by that thing. So then I'm going to shift my mindset, remind myself this is, now and not 50 years ago. But it's really interesting to feel like when our brother died, it was like, oh, like it instantly took me back to what we must have felt like growing up.
Yeah,
Right? Just like gross and compressed and tight and like I was suffocating.
yeah.
Yeah, instantly.
Well, and to navigate all those feelings, to learn that we call it the muck,
Yeah,
right? But it this collection of experiences, traumas over the years, or what we were born into,
right,
to put all of those feelings in a little package
right,
and to be able to look at them from this outside perspective,
right.
which is so useful.
Yeah,
Because I think for how many years was I in fight or flight?
right,
Or are those pockets of time where I would go into fight or flight?
right.
Um, and those weeks leading up with Jerry, that was the muck.
Yeah,
And it was so clear
yeah.
that because I had just finished my inner child work
Mm.
and like healed my root chakra, like one day it was like,
Mm-hmm.
that spark.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that was very clearly That maybe that was the first time I was able to define it.
Yeah.
To have it come back around and be, I was so consumed by it, but I knew it wasn't mine.
Right.
And to be able to look at it and be like, oh, this is the family muck.
Hmm.
That's not my story going forward, but I
Right.
see it.
Well, and what you're saying though speaks to, I think, a really big indirect thing we're saying is that, these things happen and we have these experiences and we figure out how to navigate and cope. That's a better word when we're little, right? And then we get older and we name it and define it.
Yeah.
And then it comes alive in a different way, which
Yeah.
I continue at my stage of life. I continue to be surprised by that. It's like, oh my gosh, I literally have a name to call it, and now it makes sense. And for 52 years, it did not make
Right.
sense. Right.
Right. So moral of the story,
Yeah.
as we'll continue this,
Yeah.
give your anxiety a name. Maybe start to look at all these different things that happen in your life instead of seeing them as isolated out of nowhere. Look at the pattern, give it a name,
Mhm.
get cozy with it.
Mhm.
It's not going anywhere.
No.
But your relationship and how you deal with it can change in an instance.
Yeah. And
Instant.
and in that, the minute that we let go of I'm supposed to be a certain way, it's like, oh, this is just how I'm made. And the more that I understand myself better and can shift and pivot because I can feel that things are changing inside, um, that's really more the point is my own acceptance of just however it is that I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of, oh gosh, if I wasn't anxious or if I didn't, it's like, well, I don't know. I don't know how to not do that.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
I love you. Well, thank you for tuning in. Like, share, and subscribe. I think that's what we're supposed to say now.
And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, in like a week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.